What's going on, YouTube? Welcome to another episode of viewer-submitted clone builds. Be sure to check out the link in the description for a playlist of all the previous episodes in this series. Last week, I asked my followers on Instagram to send me their clones, along with parts lists and some basic info about their builds. This time, however, I asked my viewers for their clones of foreign service weapons rather than US clones, like in previous episodes. I chose the following submissions based on criteria such as rarity, uniqueness, and overall how correct the clone is. Due to my lack of personal knowledge on foreign service rifles, however, I've relied heavily on my followers to provide information about their builds, and I've asked that they send in any reference photos they have of the actual service rifle their clone is based on. My followers were also asked to give their insight as to what the hardest part or parts of the clone were to track down, as well as what nation and what entity uses that gun. These entities could include a single individual, a unit, or even an entire branch of their military. And lastly, if you guys want this series to continue, let me know by liking, commenting, and subscribing to the channel. And if your submission didn't make this video, then don't sweat it because it can still make it into the next one. So without further ado, let's get into this episode's submissions. Our first submission for this episode comes from John C. and is a pair of modernized AK-100 series rifles seen in use by Russia's Zaslon unit. The first rifle is an AK-104, based on a Kalashnikov USA KP-104 SBR, wearing a Belomo PK-01VS red dot sight. Some viewers may remember my video on my AK-104, as I'm a fan of this platform. John's second rifle is an AK-103 clone based on a Russian Saiga AK, which has numerous parts swapped out in order to create a 100% accurate AK-103, including the front sight base and wedged gas block, which are used for more secure mounting of a GP-25 grenade launcher. Our second submission comes from a viewer who wishes to remain anonymous, but who has submitted multiple Combloc rifles. The viewer's first rifle is a late Chinese Type 56 export model, which they state was sent to the Middle East at some point in its life and then was captured by US forces during Operation Desert Storm. The rifle was demilled and then sold as a parts kit in the US, before being rebuilt on a new receiver using all of the original parts, with correct spot welds and selector stamps present on the new receiver. Their second rifle is a clone of a Russian AK-12, which features the correct barrel profile, correct receiver, and even the so-called bump rivet, which initiates rotation of the bolt on a real AK-12. Our third submission comes from @Beach Ballistics and is our first foreign NATO rifle. This rifle is a clone of an early G36 as adopted by the German Bundeswehr in 1997, complete with the proper receiver markings and a Hensoldt dual red dot / 3-power scope combo. The owner states that the rifle was originally a 1999 HK SL8 import before being converted to its current state by Tommy Built Tactical. He states that the optic was the hardest part to find, as well as being the most costly, which is unfortunate because, in his own words, the optic sucks to use despite being so iconic to the platform. It should come as no surprise that our next submissions are from Joel at Otter Weapon Works. Not only does Joel have an impressive collection of US service weapon clones, but he is also apparently a connoisseur of foreign rifles as well. By the way, both of these rifles have been featured in videos from Administrative Result, so be sure to go there if you want to go check those out and have a more detailed look at them. Links will be in the description. Joel's first submission is a rifle a lot of you probably saw in the news and social media back in 2019, and that is the L119A2 carried by British SAS operator Christian Craighead. Craighead carried this rifle during an infamous 2019 terrorist attack in Nairobi, Kenya. Photos of Craighead with this rifle have been synonymous with the incident due to his heroic actions, and it didn't take long for the clone community to take a closer look at his rifle. Joel's rifle replicates the original in painstaking detail, with notable parts including the Colt Canada IUR, or Integrated Upper Receiver, which Joel states is a unicorn in terms of rarity, as well as the SIG Romeo 4T optic. While these rifles are typically issued with Aimpoint T2s, Craighead was given this optic by a rep from SIG to try out just in time for its moment in the spotlight. Finally, Joel states that the rifle was even spray painted using a British laundry bag to ensure that it had the proper spray pattern. Joel's second submission is, of course, his Swedish AK-5C, an extremely rare rifle in the United States. Joel states that this rifle started out life as a regular FN FNC, and over the course of the last 12 years, he has collected all of the components to convert it to the updated AK-5C rifle used by the Swedish military. Joel attributes this build taking as long as it did to both the rarity of the parts in the US, as well as the fact that many European countries treat every firearm component as if it was an actual firearm, making it extremely difficult to import them to the US. If you hadn't guessed by now, every AK-5 part for this gun was hard to source, so Joel could not specify any single part as being the hardest. Calling this build a labor of love would be an understatement, and I can't thank Joel enough for taking the time to send it in. This next submission comes from at PVD Armory and is possibly the most cost-effective clone featured so far in the series. This particular rifle is a clone of the original C7 used by Canada's military since 1984. While at first glance this rifle looks very similar to the M16A2 previously used by US forces, the C7 has subtle differences and different receiver markings due to being made by Colt Canada, formerly known as Dymaco. The most impressive part of this build is that the owner was able to assemble it for under $700, showing that cloning doesn't have to be expensive. Notable parts include a Brownell's C7 upper and a C7 marked lower receiver from Bad Attitude Department. Our next submission comes from At Based Firearms and is an extremely rare SVD Dragunov built from a Russian parts kit with a custom turned barrel with the correct length and correct profile. Prices on rifles like these have skyrocketed in recent years, with true Russian examples being worth as much as a new car, and Chinese knockoffs being worth as much as a used car. This kit in particular was originally a late model SVD that came with black polymer furniture, however the owner has swapped it out for classic wood furniture, as well as adding a PSO1 scope and a surplus sling. Rifles like these remind me of the phrase, never meet your heroes, since the experience of actually shooting one is often described as pretty underwhelming and is often characterized as simply shooting a semi-automatic Mosin. That being said, I'm still jealous and I have this gun on my bucket list. This next submission comes from at Tier 1 Outfitters, a retailer that you all should check out, especially if you're into European clones. Since they are the sole source for B&T Rotex 3 762, as well as Rotex 5 556 compact suppressors in the US, you'll need to talk to them about completing your Euro rifle clone, such as this HK416A5 used by Ireland's Army Ranger Wing, or ARW, which is Ireland's Tier 1 unit. Like the US's own Tier 1 units, they have made heavy use of the 416 platform, though in this case have opted for the more up-to-date A5 variant with an 11-inch barrel. The owner states that the hardest part to track down was the base rifle itself, as MR223 imports are very rare and sometimes fetch five-figure prices in the US, which makes it even more impressive that he's also working on a clone of the 14.5-inch variant. Our eighth submission comes from Anthony Fiore and is an East German AKS-74N built from a very rare East German parts kit. This rifle has an interesting history, as East Germany had only recently outfitted their army with 5.45 caliber AKs prior to the fall of the Berlin Wall. Anthony states that these rifles were first issued to airborne troops, but after East Germany ceased to exist, these rifles saw use in the Balkan states instead. Anthony states that the majority of the parts are East German, including the barrel, with the only required 922R parts being US made instead. These parts kits are uncommon in the US, making the kit itself the hardest part to track down, but that didn't stop him from completing the build along with an East German hat, pants, bayonet, mag pouches, and a cleaning kit to match. Our ninth and final submission for this episode is a surprise double feature from Otter Weapon Works. I mentioned to Joel that there was a lack of non-AK clone submissions, and he was kind enough to offer two more of his less common foreign clones for your viewing pleasure. I'll present these together since they have a pretty obvious theme. The first actually is our first cloned shotgun in the entire series, an FN Auto 5 shotgun. This A5 was imported by CAI, with all parts numbers matching and zero modifications whatsoever. These shotguns are extremely rare in the US, and like the next rifle, were used in the Rhodesian Bush War, and are synonymous with that particular conflict. The second part of the submission is of course Joel's clone of a Rhodesian FAL, based on a Springfield Armory SAR-48. After swapping out a handful of parts for period correct ones, the rifle itself was finished off with a proper paint job that makes this rifle so iconic. I'll clip in a few photos of these rifles used in the real conflict, which effectively show how Joel managed to capture the unique aesthetic of these rifles. After seeing all these cool clone builds, do me a favor and tell me which one was your favorite down in the comments section below. Did any of these inspire you to start your next project, or make changes to already completed ones? Let me know if you want to see more like this in the series, or if you have any suggestions for future specials like this one, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.